We're going to be talking about George Eliot today and the Industrial Revolution, a time of immense change in the UK, in Britain. And the question, the focus of today is about change, about coping with that and all the different things that are going on at any one time. So, the question of the day is this. There's so much going on all the time. So many questions, demands and expectations. Sometimes I just want to hide away and forget it all, my questioner says. And today we're looking at George Eliot, the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, who wrote during a time of immense change, the Industrial Revolution. She was highly acclaimed for her depictions of that change. As you know, in the audiobooks at the moment, I'm reading Middlemarch is the one that I have selected. She is quoted as saying, "If we could truly register all the sounds of life, we'd lose our minds." And this being the Female Stoic podcast, we are very much focused on being aware of the external forces, the external voices, messages, and things that we expose ourselves to every day, and being mindful of exactly what experiences we're having and what we choose to let in. So she is writing, or was writing, should I say, at a time of immense change. So there are many, many external forces attacking her inner peace all the time. And we're going to just look at that now. This was the Industrial Revolution. It was overwhelming. It changed rural England to such a degree that it was almost unrecognisable from what it had previously been. So to have been alive in that time and been used to this rural backdrop and the communities and the ways of being, and suddenly everything is dispersed and associations are disbanded, and there's a huge move from the country to the towns and the cities. So that would have been a lot to deal with. If we look at what happened during the Industrial Revolution, you've got the first silk factories, you've got the flying shuttle invention for the production of wider fabrics, you've got the importation of raw cotton from overseas, you've got the first canal, the Bridgewater Canal that's opened, the invention of the spinning jenny to produce cloth much quicker, you've got the new steam engine and the introduction of steam-powered railway locomotives and steamships, steam that can power the new massive mills that was suddenly erupting in every town in the north. You've got the invention of the water frame, so you can attach the spinning machines to a water wheel to power them, to make them move faster. You've got the introduction of much machinery that is now threatening the skilled crafts of the textile workers that were originally located in these smaller areas. Suddenly, their livelihood is threatened. So you've got this introduction of rioting against this machinery, represented by the Luddite movement. You've got the invention of a puddling furnace to make iron, power looms, wool combing machines, and then certain political acts had to come into place. The Combination Act, which prevented workers collectively bargaining in groups or through unions for better pay, because this backlash, these craftsmen who have been put out of work, they are going to obviously rebel against that. And that rebellion resulted in riots, and these riots had to be contained. So the government got involved to contain them. You've got the first railway locomotive, and then laws making the destruction of industrial machines punishable by death. So immense change. Then Factory Acts passed to protect children under the age of 9 from working in the textile factory. So that tells us that children and women were exploited at that time, just before then. Then the Poor Law was passed. It goes on and on and on. You've got iron warships being manufactured. And then at the end of the Industrial Revolution, 1861, you've got this American Civil War, and the mills closed, a mass unemployment, resulting in the Great Lancashire Cotton Famine, because there was a lack of raw materials because of the American Civil War. So, George Eliot was writing during these times. This sequence of events placed Britain as a major player suddenly on the global stage of trade and manufacturing. It was a leading commercial nation. But of course, 2% of the world's population were making a massive percentage of the world's products. So there's going to be immense strain. And this is what happens in huge times of change. So to go back to the question, there's so much going on all the time, so many questions, demands and expectations. Sometimes I just want to hide away and forget it all. At times of political change, of geographical change, of societal change, it's easy to want to just hide away. And to re-quote George Eliot, if we could truly register all the sounds of life, we'd lose our minds. So the idea is, when looking at this, to work out how to be more selective about what we expose ourselves to so that it doesn't completely overwhelm us. George Eliot, pen name for Mary Ann Evans, produced Scenes of Clerical Life, Adam Bede, The Mill on the Floss, Silas Marner, Romola, Felix Holt, The Radical Middlemarch, Daniel Deronda, and poems, all during this time. If she had allowed herself to be overwhelmed by the societal events of this time, she would not have been able to be so prolific. So what she decided to do was take the experience and channel it into something positive. And this is serving as our example. Not just was this going on, but she was only 16 when her mother turned gravely ill. Her mother died, and then Mary Ann Evans remained at home to help her father. Now, luckily for her, this was a genteel family. So she was privileged. She had a loose use of the library in a local family, private lessons, boarding school. She was highly intelligent, and as a result of that, the great connections that her family had, she became a bit of a celebrity of her time. So she wasn't like the Brontes and Austen in that way. She was highly celebrated during her lifetime, not posthumously, but during her lifetime, for her achievements, and she was in fact the best paid author, second only to Charles Dickens. So she was really flying the flag for success. And she had the opportunities to meet with academics, to discuss philosophy and religion without constraint. And this broadened this horizon of hers beyond the evangelical backdrop of her youth, much to the dislike of her father. So she had this quite spiritual and strict Christian upbringing, and then she moved beyond that. She did admire the work of Charlotte Bronte. She did admire Jane Eyre, but she was said to have criticised Jane Eyre's decision to reject Mr. Rochester due to her ethical beliefs about self-sacrifice. And she believed self-sacrifice should be in a nobler cause than just the laws that are set by religion to tell us what to do. So she was outward looking, but again, she was very focused during an immense time of change. She had an unconventional affair with a married man, and she travelled to Germany with him to live with him. This man, George Lewis, privately called her Dorothea or Dodo, who was the protagonist in her novel that I'm reading, Middlemarch. So she actually lived as Mrs. Lewis even though they were unmarried. So in that way, she's different to these evangelical teachings and this Christian backdrop that some of these novels of her contemporaries had. But she was committed to representing these social pressures of English society. She wanted to represent the social classes and their struggles, and she believed fiction had an essential social function. So rather than allowing the deprivation and the dissolution of the local communities and the environmental backdrop that she saw all around her, rather than let that impact her negatively, she chose to write about it. Even Leo Tolstoy, the Russian writer and moral philosopher, renowned for War and Peace and Anna Karenina, greatly esteemed her work. So this focus she had, non-judgmental account, a raw account of what was going on, she managed to produce during a time of immense change. Henry James, the famous American-British author, called her a horse-faced blue-stocking, but said that he could not help falling in love with her. So she was really a bit of a head-turner. She was making waves at that time. And she was, in Middlemarch, depicting this self-sacrificing woman, Dorothea Brooke, which played into the popular narrative of the time. But what she did was talk a person who might well have been beaten by life, by the experiences that she was exposed to and what was going on around her, and the expectations put upon her, and she freed her through her novel. So originally, if you don't know the story, Dorothea marries a man 27 years her senior, Mr. Casaubon. She believes him to be her superior, but she quickly realises that he has more ego than intellect. And this depicts a scandal that was unrepresented at the time, the failing marriage. So even though you've got Emily Bronte in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall depicting this well, this was not celebrated in the same way because the books were not known as Middlemarch was. As I say, Mary Ann Evans was a bit of a celebrity. So she's disappointed, essentially. Dorothea is disappointed and she realises, this is not all that it was cracked up to be. And then Mr. Casaubon being 27 years her senior, eventually he dies, but he realises that this friendship, that unconventional friendship she has with a local Mr. Ladislaw, is a little bit more than just that. He suspects there is a love interest there, and he adds a codicil in his will that disinherits Dorothea if she marries Ladislaw after he dies. So now we've got this dilemma. Dorothea has a dilemma and she doesn't know whether she wants to stick with this inheritance, value the wealth and property and stability that the now dead husband, Mr. Casaubon, has left, or reject it in order to realise her virtue and what she really wants, which is to be intellectually challenged and committed to somebody who does that for her, which is Ladislaw. This Middlemarch was episodal, so it was like Charles Dickens' work, that it came out in episodes every week, which produced a sustained interest as readers would eagerly anticipate each episode. And its popularity was due to this realistic representation of the changes that rural England saw. Okay. So there is so much going on in her experience and in the books. There are so many questions, demands, and expectations of her. And to go back to the question, this is what the questioner says. There's so much going on all the time, so many questions, demands, expectations. Sometimes I just want to hide away and forget it all. So we're looking at Mary Ann Evans, pen name George Eliot, and we're seeing that it is possible to channel that. To channel those external forces into something positive. And this is how we relate this to our journals. Now, as you know, every week we do a journaling exercise. And I don't have my journal to hand. But if I did, I would be able to show you that in this week, I have decided to focus on this dichotomy of control, this idea that everything that's going on around us, we don't need to ignore that, but we need to take elements of that and use it and channel it into something positive that we can use creatively. So our task today within our journal is to write down something that is an external force, something that's happening outside of our power of control, that we can actually use as inspiration to create something. It might be a creative piece of work. It might be something that's inspired us to try something new ourselves. It might be something that's inspired us to do completely the opposite because we just can't believe that what we've just experienced is happening. It's a reflective journal task this week to write down something that has inspired us to take action, be it positive or negative, and then underneath write down what that action was. Our minds can only handle so much before we become overwhelmed, so it's our job to filter out the extraneous information. If we're sensitive to everything around us all the time, we're not protecting our inner peace. George Eliot said, "What we call despair is often only the painful eagerness of unfed hope." And this quote comes from her novel, Middlemarch. It's suggesting that what feels like despair, what feels like overwhelm and, oh, I'm never going to be able to cope with all this, is actually a deep desire or longing for something that has not yet been realised or fed. Okay? So, despair in this instance is not a complete lack of feeling or will, but it's an intense, uncomfortable emotion stemming from this unsatiated desire for a better future or desired outcome. We want something good to happen, but we've not given it the means to be fulfilled, so we are focusing on all these different things that are going on around us. And my message today is to take one of those things and use it in a positive way. Whether it be to create action that is as a result of being shocked by what we've seen, for example, or being inspired by what we've seen, or wishing to reject what we've seen, we can turn that into positive action. Suffering comes from wanting something so badly, the waiting and the inability to achieve it become a torment. So, if we are allowing everything in, if we are allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed by everything, we are wanting desperately to shut it out, but we are overwhelmed and feeling unable to do that. So instead, if we spin it round and we say, well, do you know what? Actually, I can use some of this, and the rest of it, I understand I have no control over whatsoever, so I'm just going to reject that. I'm just going to ignore that. A good example of this is choosing, when the radio comes on, to switch off the adverts, to switch off the news, to edit the experiences we have so that in our quiet time, our downtime, our time we have where we can choose, we make the effort to reject our exposure to those external influences. Another quote from George Eliot: "The effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive. For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts." I'll repeat that. The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts. And things that are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who live faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. The growing good of the world is partly dependent on us protecting ourselves in order for us to attain our higher self, in order for us to go out into the world and be the best versions of ourselves. Like ripples in a stream, if we do that, that then ripples out to the people around us. So it's not entirely self-serving, protecting our inner peace. It has altruistic elements too. She said in Middlemarch, "Goodness is of a modest nature, easily discouraged, and when much elbowed in early life by unabashed vices, is apt to retire into extreme privacy." Goodness is of a modest nature, easily discouraged. So we begin as children with a clear sense of our virtue, of what we represent. We are much elbowed in early life by unabashed vices. So these external forces are attacking us all the time, are encouraging us to turn our head, to take different paths. If you can imagine being alive at the time of the Industrial Revolution, you've got so many things going on, both socially, politically, environmentally. It will be very easy to be distracted by that, and perhaps make choices that affect your inner peace. So many things you cannot change. So what our job is to take some of those things that we can work with and leave the rest behind, which is what George Eliot did. She used and made accounts of the societal changes to her benefit. And she did that with a clear and balanced vision. So she wasn't coming from one extreme place or another. She tried to create a balanced account of what was happening, a non-judgmental account. So the message today is to create our own reality. Be mindful of the messages that we're exposing ourselves to. We can dictate our own narrative, but this does involve building our inner citadel and keeping the walls strong. Now, as you know, the Stoic philosophy emphasizes that external events can't truly harm us without our consent, so we remain secure in our inner world, which is governed by our judgments and will. This is our true domain. Okay? These are the messages from Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, an unshakable fortress of the mind, built through constant practice and reflection, allows us to find tranquility and react rationally to adversity, rather than being reactive emotionally, understanding things are going to attack us, things are going to affect our inner peace, but only as much as we allow them to, and we don't have to react immediately to that. We have to create the pause. As I always say, the power is in the pause. Create a distance from what's happening around us and us ourselves in order to rationally make sense of that. Everything is a matter of judgment, Epictetus says. Our experience of an event is shaped by our internal interpretation and reaction rather than the event itself. The mind freed from passions is an impenetrable fortress, said Marcus Aurelius. So this unassailable stronghold that we have cannot be ruled by irrational emotion and desire. We have to create space between that. Doesn't mean we're not going to feel things. Imagine growing up in a village and suddenly the backdrop of the village is completely changed. People are moving away, things are happening. Suddenly the craftspeople around you, their livelihood is threatened because you've got this huge uptake of machinery and development of steam power. It's going to create fear, it's going to create anger, it's going to create rejection. And within that, it's up to us as individuals to say, how do we cope with this? How can we manage? Let's pause and let's think rationally about what we should do as a family in order to survive. And going back to the question, being overwhelmed by everything that's going on around, it is still relevant today. It's always relevant. That we can find something positive, some means of growth within change, and reject the rest of it in order to maintain our inner peace. Do what you must, let happen what may, said Marcus Aurelius. So whatever happens and whatever's going on, we have to some degree, accept external events as predetermined by nature or fate. We have to understand that that's going to happen. That's a natural development. And we're going to have to work within those constraints. But we are not going to allow them to break us. And on that note, I'm going to sign off. Thank you all so much for coming. And I shall see you next Friday.